So we all know Bungie's bringing back another Destiny 1 raid in Season 22. Some have suggested that it could actually be Leviathan from D2 Vanilla, though I'm pretty sure Bungie mentioned they would reprise all the D1 raids before any of the D2 ones, but correct me if I'm wrong. Destiny 1 had 4 raids: Vault of Glass, Crota's End, King's Fall, and Wrath of the Machine. Since we have 2 of those already, that leaves us with Crota's End and Wrath of the Machine. Now recently in an interview, Nico Stevens, the senior narrative designer at Bungie, had this to say about SIVA. So whenever the Warmind comes up, whether it was back in Season of the Worthy or now, SIVA has been a part of the conversation narratively. We talk about it, we kick it around, but ultimately I think SIVA is a story that was told in Rise of Iron and was finished in Rise of Iron. While narratively it's possible to upend those stories and bring them back, I think seasonally one thing that we have to do is make sure that we are focused on the story that the season is telling. I think SIVA, while it's cool, it would be looking backwards. I've seen many people online taking this as confirmation that Wrath of the Machine won't be coming back, although I'm pretty confident Bungie was just talking about the actual SIVA story going forward. And if you remember, these reprised raids are like moments in time. They're not canon chronologically, thus they have no story implications. So Wrath, I feel, will almost certainly come back at some point. On stream the other day, one of our members, Ruby, brought up an interesting point, that being that if Bungie is done with SIVA narratively going forward, then remastering all the SIVA assets only for Wrath of the Machine may be a bit much. As much as some Destiny players will fight this, bringing the old raids back isn't as simple as just porting them over. So I made a community post asking you all, if Wrath of the Machine came back with fallen enemies instead of SIVA, would you be okay with that? Not including Vosik or Aksis, they would obviously be brought back as they were, just like Oryx. And this is what you guys had to say. Keep in mind that Destiny is a very layered game with many kinds of players, but whether you're a sweat, a casual, or somewhere in the middle, like I'm sure the vast majority of you are, your opinion matters, and I want to give you a chance to be heard. So be sure to leave your comments down below, and they might just show up in the next video. Speaking of, the topic for the next video will be Crucible. More specifically, if it were up to you, would you like to see Crucible lean more casual or more competitive, outside of Trials of Osiris? Spoiler alert, I want to talk a lot about combined arms. Anyway, SIVA. So I said if Wrath of the Machine were to come back with fallen enemies instead of SIVA variants, would you be okay with that? Of course, because SIVA is technically a variant of Fallen. Vosik and Aksis would of course remain SIVA. Now after about 18,000 votes, 31% of you said that you'd accept a Fallen version of the Wrath of the Machine raid, while 69% of you, nice, said that you wouldn't be okay with that, and that Wrath of the Machine must stay SIVA. Devil Dev says, I personally feel as though the challenge that the SIVA-fied Fallen provided was one of the best attributes of Wrath of the Machine. Their larger health bar and their projectiles, dregs released on precision kills, really kept you on your toes. It just wouldn't be the same without it. Now he brings up a really interesting point that I kind of forgot because Rise of Iron was a long time ago. So in my memory, the SIVA were literally just red Fallen, but that's actually not true. SIVA enemies had little quirks and gameplay mechanics that did actually separate them from the Fallen, which is something I honestly forgot about. Cade6 says it will be too hard to bring back a whole race like SIVA. I think Leviathan will return instead because Lightfall's story revolved around Callus. I thought the exact same thing, but again, I'm pretty sure Bungie said that they would bring all the D1 raids back before revisiting any of the D2 ones. But if they were to go back on that, or if they just never said it and I'm totally wrong, I could absolutely see Leviathan being the next one, like you said, because the whole Lightfall story revolved around Callus and they just brought back the Leviathan from Season of the Haunted. Alright, Zombie Fox says, I never played that raid before, but if it was to come back, I would rather have the SIVA variants. Sounds unique, and I think putting regular enemy types would ruin the immersion. It is of course important to remember that a lot of people didn't get to play Wrath of the Machine, and it would be kind of unfortunate if Wrath were to come back and they weren't able to experience the SIVA variants. That, and of course the environment is SIVA, so it would kind of break the immersion if we were not also fighting SIVA-fied Fallen. Like imagine if you're fighting Vosik, right? And you look around and instead of seeing SIVA, you just see a bunch of like House of Devils Fallen. Alright, Ruby Algorithm, who of course was also the person that mentioned this on stream, says that I want to clarify one thing about what I said. I didn't mean just the enemy's assets. Bungie would have to redo all of the SIVA environment assets as well. And think about when the remaster of King's Fall came out. Bungie had just made a shit ton of new Hive assets. So what makes sense for the raid? A Hive-based raid. And then they go on to say that back to the question at hand, I would rather have the atmosphere of SIVA rather than just Fallen. But Ruby brings up a really good point. It's not just the enemies that they have to bring back, which is, to be fair, probably the most resource-intensive part. But they also have to bring back all of the SIVA assets from the Wrath of the Machine raid, which isn't easy. I find it kind of funny how Bungie will straight up tell us, hey, like raids are really hard to make and they're very resource intensive and it's not as easy as just porting it over from D1. And then certain members of the Destiny community are just like, no, it's not. Shockwave says, I literally just want Wrath to come to D2 so I can play it for the first time. It looks so cool. I'm gonna be real with you guys, I only did Wrath of the Machine a handful of times, so I really don't remember a whole lot about the raid, especially Aksis. I could not tell you how that encounter works off the top of my head. I remember Vosik. Vosik was awesome. That's like one of my favorite raid encounters ever. I remember absolutely hating the Aksis boss fight, and I don't know why. Maybe I was just bad. Alex, I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher this. Hudashavisky says that they can always reuse them later. Maybe House of Light will use SIVA. This is another topic that'll come up a bit later, which is the idea that if you are gonna reintroduce all these SIVA assets, maybe you could say make some SIVA themed strike variants so that you're putting them to good use, so it's not all just going to waste. And simultaneously adding some nice strike variation, which I think is absolutely something that they should do if they bring back Wrath and all the assets with it. 12 says, I doubt it. I mean, Bungie has said they believe that SIVA's story has ended in Rise of Iron. Besides, at this point in time, SIVA is not only kind of obsolete, but it is also very underpowered compared to what we've seen so far. I mean, Cloud Strider tech is more advanced than SIVA ever was, which is interesting that you say that. You know, the weapons in Destiny are not the only thing that have been power creeped over the last few years. The enemies have as well. As we go on, we fight stronger and stronger enemies because us as Guardians are getting more and more powerful. So we need more powerful enemies to step up and challenge us. Although I don't think that really matters. I mean, we still go toe-to-toe with the Fallen of the different houses all the time. And again, I think when Bungie said that they believe SIVA's story has ended, they did mean it. I don't think SIVA will get any new story going forward. However, Wrath of the Machine wouldn't count as new story because it doesn't take place chronologically in Destiny 2. It's just there for gameplay purposes. Okay, this is something I really want to talk about. Jacob Hauka, with a SIVA profile picture, nice, says that they changed the skin of the Vex in the revamped Vault of Glass, so they have no excuse not to bring back the SIVA Fallen. This is something that I saw a couple people saying in the comments, and that's actually not true. So in the Vault of Glass, you fight 2 or 3 different kinds of Vex. There's the present Vex that you fight outside, I believe. There is the Vex from the past, which you find in the throne room, and on the other side of the throne room, you will find Vex from the future. One of them is called Precursor Vex, and the other, I forgot what it's called. I think it's like Ascendant or something. Now, I thought this was the case as well. I thought they brought back these Vex for Vault of Glass, but that's actually not the case. You see, back in Curse of Osiris, when we were going through the Infinite Forest and going to different Vex timelines, we could go to either Mercury's future, past, or present, which, you guessed it, in the past, you find the Precursor Vex, in the future, you find the Ascendant Vex, and in the present, you fight the Present Vex. So these are assets that they already had made for Destiny 2, and it just made sense to reuse them in Vault of Glass because they were assets that were originally from the Vault of Glass. So they didn't actually remake them specifically for Vault of Glass. Sergeant Soft says SIVA Fallen and Splicers aren't just reskins of the Fallen. They're a completely new enemy type that are just simply stronger than Fallen. Larger health bars, more aggressive, etc. So yeah, they do have an excuse. Plus, the entirety of Leviathan is already in the game, so they're much more likely to bring back that raid. Now, I won't touch on Leviathan anymore because we already talked about that, but they do have a point when they say that SIVA Fallen are kind of like a new enemy type. I'm not going to go all the way and say that they are a new enemy type because, look, let's be real with ourselves, they are just variants of Fallen, but they do behave differently, they look different, and they have some different gameplay quirks to them, so it's not just a reskin. Pugmaster1 says, it's like Leviathan with Red Legion enemies. It's not lore accurate, and it ruins the immersion. That's a really interesting thought. Imagine going into Leviathan and seeing a bunch of like Gaul's forces, like Red Legion forces. Now, that would be even weirder because that is in Destiny 2. They do have those models, everything's scripted. That would strike me as very, very, very odd. And again, I'm not saying that I want Wrath of the Machine to come back with Fallen, but it's interesting to hear everyone's take on it. Half-Eaten Calzone says SIVA enemies are essential to the tone and look of the raid. Having just bosses be SIVA would look kind of off. You and Only You says, while I do want the SIVA enemies, I don't want to see a SIVA Brig. Boys, imagine that. Imagine a SIVA Brig. Oh man. Fires like little swarm nades at you. Oh, that'd be wild. Isfit Solaris says, I'd honestly take the same enemies with a red recolor and buffed stats. I work in game design and so get how making entire assets would be hard, but I think the raid wouldn't feel right without the SIVA Fallen. The one enemy that does need its OG model and everything is Randall the Vandal. Oh yeah, we did have, wasn't there like an extremely strong Vandal, like right before the Aksis boss fight? Oh shit, there was, I remember that. Look, another thing to keep in mind is that Bungie said in a TWAB a while ago that if they were to bring back a raid that already had its original raid exotic in the game, that they would make a new exotic for it, which really seemed to be about as direct of a nod as you can to Wrath of the Machine. And also, come on, like, people have been wanting SIVA for so long, literal years, Season of the Plague, Season of the Splicer. It has been years. Imagine the W if they bring back Wrath of the Machine. That would make so many people happy. A lot of us still have that SIVA itch that we really need scratched, and I think Wrath of of the Machine alone would scratch that itch. You don't even need to expand on the story anymore. Zorpal says, I like Wrath because of the mechanics and music, not because it's all about SIVA. It would be a little bit of a bummer if Wrath came back without the SIVA variant of Fallen, but I'd still be super excited because it was my favorite raid. Besides, the only thing different about Splicer Fallen were the fact that some could teleport, shot out SIVA balls that tracked after they died, and how they looked. They weren't really that different from regular Fallen to begin with, unlike something like Taken Fallen. And that's why I do hesitate to call them a new enemy type, because they are just Fallen. Like, at the end of the day, you're fighting Fallen. It's just a bit different. It's a variant. It's not as different as something like, they say, the Taken Fallen. A lot of people talk about reissued content and getting old content reissued as opposed to new content, and honestly, I've never minded reissued content. I think it's better than nothing, and I think that especially for something like Wrath of the Machine and Crota's End and all these old D1 raids, a lot of us genuinely do just want to play them in Destiny 2. I don't think there's anything wrong with reissuing this older content with a new coat of paint on it and some new mechanics. I feel like if people enjoy it, it doesn't really matter. But in my opinion, as long as the game feels fresh and as long as players are enjoying the content we have, I don't think it really matters all that much if it's reissued or not. That's just my opinion. I'm gonna get on to the next one. Opulence, Harbinger of Chaos, says, if for nothing else, the aesthetic of SIVA is one of the best in Destiny. I love the theme of it, and it really adds a deeper layer of storytelling to the game. I always love the ornaments that involve SIVA because they genuinely feel interesting and unique compared to others. I really hope to see more SIVA ornaments and cosmetics, possibly even a SIVA themed shader. That would be cool. I could totally see them doing something like that for like the master mode clear or a flawless clear of Wrath of the Machine. Oh my god, imagine if the reward for a flawless Wrath of the Machine clear was like an animated SIVA shader. That would be so cool. I haven't flawlessed a raid since we did Petra's run. I would go out of my way to do that. That would be amazing. Alright, Carter Nichols says, it really wouldn't be that hard. D1 and D2 were on the same engine, go through and touch up the models and slap Fallen AI on them. It's not like they're making everything from scratch. Now, I wanted to include this because Bungie has said multiple times that things are not just that easy. And look guys, I know we don't like to accept it, but if things were that easy, we probably would have gotten them by now. I don't like it when I hear people say, oh, well, Bungie's just lazy. No, they're not. Bungie has made it overly apparent time and time again that they do not go out of their way to be lazy. That's not ever their goal. And things like this, they genuinely are difficult. I feel like a lot of us tend to pretend like we are game developers and that we know what goes into all this stuff, and we just don't. And like this person says as well, if you were to just slap a Fallen AI on them, they still wouldn't even be SIVA, because SIVA don't behave exactly like Fallen do. They do different things. You would also, I'm sure, then get people that are upset that the SIVA are not acting exactly like they did in D1, or that they're not teleporting or throwing the SIVA nades. That is, if you just slapped a Fallen AI on them. Beetle says, they gave us the unique designs for special enemies in King's Fallback. Why wouldn't they give us a simple cast of characters with special colors? It would seem lazy not to. Again, I don't like saying lazy. I think that's kind of projecting a lot on Bungie when you say that they're just being lazy, but they gave us unique designs for special enemies in King's Fallback. Now, I'm assuming that you're not talking about the bosses. I think pretty much everyone expects at this point that the bosses are never really going to see a redesign. If there are old bosses like Crota, I could see Crota changing a little bit, maybe some new effects or particles and stuff, but things like Oryx, the Death Singers, War Priest, Golgroth, they were never going to change their model. You kind of can't. They're the most recognizable part of the raid. So I'm assuming Beetle is talking about that knight that holds the thing at the end of the Oryx fight. I'm blanking on the name. What the f is it called? It's a yellow health bar immune knight. You all know what I'm talking about. But that knight that appears in Oryx and War Priest, obviously that is not a model that I believe we've seen in D2. So that is a model that they only brought back for King's Fall, which is very true. Unless it isn't, which again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure they only use it in King's Fall. Alright, Crocodilius says, people talking about SIVA hits the same as my dad saying everything was better 30 years ago. Oh, this is gonna be spicy. First of all, remove the rose-colored glasses. I bet you had complaints during the SIVA era. Second, it's the past. No amount of whining will bring back the glory days. I personally don't really have a dog in this fight because I didn't super care for SIVA when it came out anyway. I just never thought SIVA was like that cool, but a lot of people really like it. Dr. Duckling, disciple of Telesto, nice, says that raids are expensive to make. Even without adding a new species, to ask Bungie to waste extra resources for a raid that is still stupid expensive seems ridiculous to me. If they can do it, for sure, by all means do it. But first, make the raid and make it good. Then do the season activities real good. Now we can make a new species if we got the budget. I'd rather have a good raid with normal Fallen than a SIVA raid with mediocre everything else. If the season is SIVA based, however, that's a different story, which of course we know it's not going to be because Bungie has already kind of shot that down. But Duckling brings up a really good point that I brought up earlier, and that is that Bungie has made it very obvious on multiple occasions that these raids are very expensive to make, and they do have bigger fish to fry in front of them. I mean, we're about to come to the final shape, which is like the end of the last 10 years of Destiny as we know it. So I would not fault them at all. Look, if Crota's End is the raid that comes back, which I think is something we should all be mentally ready for, it won't be that surprising, because maybe Bungie just wants to wait until they're done with the final shape before they start diverting all their resources to SIVA and Wrath of the Machine. And you know, I think this year it seems like Bungie is really trying to make the seasonal stories good, impactful, different, and of course they're also really focusing on the final shape, and if we get a new subclass, they're probably also really focusing on that. I would not fault them at all if they were like, hey, you know, we have a lot going on this year, this is a big year for us, we really want to nail it, especially after the reception to Lightfall. Let's just bring back Crota's End, because we know that that will be a simpler task than Wrath of the Machine, and Wrath of the Machine will be our first reprised raid in the new era of Destiny. And while I know it would be unfortunate to get like 2 Hive remastered raids in a row, I do think that thought process makes sense. SIVA is also aesthetically and story-wise very separate from kind of a lot of the other enemies except for Fallen, so you could argue that the tone of, you know, bringing back Wrath of the Machine may make more sense in a post-Light and Dark Saga era of Destiny, because SIVA of course isn't paracausal, it's just kind of a robot plague, I guess. Would it feel weird if Lightfall ends and that's like, hey guys, Crota's End? Okay, that might feel a little odd, to me at least. I don't know, that would feel a little odd to me. I would of course enjoy it and accept it, but it would just feel a little strange. Zero says no because Crota's End should return. Look, boys, what are the chances that Crota's End actually comes back as a dungeon? I'm not gonna lie, I think it gets more likely every passing season. All it takes is a Hive-themed season. Like, if season 23 is Hive-themed, dude, we might be looking at Crota's End being a dungeon. I don't know how I'd feel about that. Of course, I'd rather see Crota's End come back with a new encounter, like midway through the raid to extend it a little bit, make it more raid length as opposed to dungeon length, and of course, making it a bit more challenging, because Crota's End, we would destroy Crota's End. People would do that shit blindfolded again. They were already doing it in D1. So they're definitely going to have to give some TLC to Crota before that comes back. Sadvado says, it's a whole raid. It should be unique. Like they made Riven for a whole raid just to be cheesed. Dude, that is so unfortunate too, because the Riven fight, in my opinion, is the best raid, the best fight in all of Destiny when you do it legit. It is so rewarding. It's so much fun. And the fact that it can just be cheesed in like 3 different ways, and Bungie just kind of gave up on patching it. I don't know, that's sad to me, man. Riven is very unique with a lot of unique animations and mechanics that was only used for that raid. But then again, you could make the exact same argument for someone like Rulk or Oryx or Tannix, literally anything. Marilyn Shark says, honestly, I always thought that if they brought back Wrath of the Machine, it'd be somehow with Scorn enemies. I was actually thinking about this yesterday. It's the closest we have to SIVA and D2 as far as an enemy type and combat type. Yeah, I was literally thinking about this the other day, because Valve the Disciple is our only Scorn raid, and it's a Scorn and Taken raid. Wouldn't that be a turn of events? If Wrath of the Machine came back and it had like Scorn in it? Oh my god, dude, that'd be weird. Mountaintop says, raid is still the raid. BFK Reaper says, not the real question to ask. We should be asking what the raid exotic would be. As most D1 vets know, Outbreak Prime, later named Outbreak Perfected, was the raid exotic for Wrath of the Machine. But Outbreak came back as an exotic mission, and if the exotic mission rotator comes in, what would that do for the raid? They'd have to make a whole new raid exotic since Outbreak isn't tied to it anymore, which of course Bungie has already said that they would do in the event that the exotic is already in the game. As far as what the exotic would be, let's think about this. So Root of Nightmares just came out with an exotic shotgun. Valve the Disciple had a pulse rifle. Vault of Glass had a fusion rifle, kind of an auto rifle, you know. Touch of Malice, scout rifle. Divinity, trace rifle. I'm missing one. Which one am I missing? Oh, and Last Wish, which was a heavy fusion rifle technically. As far as what a new SIVA themed raid exotic would look like, god, I don't know, man. That's hard. I think it's pretty easy to rule out something like a sword or a glaive, especially since we just got Vexcalibur. I would also be kind of surprised if it was something like a linear fusion rifle, because Sleeper already exists, and Sleeper is kind of, you know, Warmind themed. I would guess it would be another primary weapon. Imagine if it was a sidearm. Some people would be really excited, some people would be pissed. Imagine if it was just like Dreg's Promise, but red. Dude, I'd be happy. I never got Dreg's Promise, and I always wanted it. But no, I would guess it would be a primary weapon, because I think there's a lot of potential there with SIVA primary weapons. Shot in the dark. I'll say it'll either be a sidearm or an auto rifle. I think a sidearm would just be way too funny, and an auto rifle would be really cool to just like bullet hose SIVA nanites at the enemies. Like kind of Osteo Striga style could be interesting. That'd be my bet. Finally, E says, with or without SIVA enemies, it's still Wrath, and you're still doing it with autotune. I don't know about that, man. Anyway, before I cut the video, I want to show some clips from around our community that I thought were either really funny, really stupid, or kind of wholesome. Edge, the Architect of the Void, kills a high-value target in a really unfortunate spot. You hate to see it. Next up, Langadan, one of our mods from the Discord, shows us a really cool simulation they made of the Puka Pond in, I believe, Unreal Engine. This is an actual playable environment that you can walk around in, and it looks so cool. Finally, Hated Nezarec managed to trio Vault of Glass with their friends, and after 114 attempts, one of them finally got Vex Mythoclast.
What the hell?
I got it! I got it!
What?
Oh! Oh, let's go! I got it! Let's go! I'm equipping it!
This is the run!
Alright guys, Callus run. Oh, fuck yes!
My favorite part about this video is that he already had all of the ornaments ready for it. I can relate, man. I bought that silver ornament the week it came out. I didn't get Vex for another, like, 6 months. And I also just want to show off this adorable art that Bera made of myself and Axolochi. The future comment videos will probably get longer as I get more into the flow of this, and as we have more topics to talk about, but I'm looking forward to doing these. I'm going to try to do them about every week or so, just to kind of make the gap between videos feel a little less long, and also, of course, to give all of you a platform and get to interact with you a bit more. So expect them somewhat weekly, and I'll upload them in an alternating pattern. Of course, the community videos will have that border around the thumbnail, whereas the normal videos won't have that. And again, next week's community video will be primarily about Crucible, casual Crucible, competitive Crucible, combined arms, all that fun stuff. So if you enjoyed, a like would be greatly appreciated. Subscribe for weekly fun Destiny content. Hope you're having a great day, night, or whatever it is. I just forgot my outro. Oh. Hope you're having a great day, night, or whatever it is. And until next time, Guardians, goodbye.